Hello, and welcome to the very first episode of The Ignition, your source for unfiltered news about the truth of what is happening in the United States of America. In an increasingly divisive news climate where billionaires are purchasing information, we have created The Ignition in order to be a direct source for you to get the most essential information to make decisions about your life, about your future, and about your democracy. The Ignition is part of the Rebel Radio Network and is sponsored by Ignite, fighting fascism in the age of its rise. Our first episode today could not be more present and could not be more important. So let us begin with this very first episode of The Ignition. We invite you to please follow along with the show, subscribe to us on all of your major platforms, and of course to comment, like, and share. The future depends on you having reliable, trustworthy access to news and information. Welcome to The Ignition. Our first story today, on Monday, December 22nd, 2025. CBS News killed a fully vetted 60 Minutes investigation into torture allegations at an El Salvador prison where the Trump administration sent hundreds of Venezuelan asylum seekers and migrants. The story was pulled less than 36 hours before broadcast. New CBS editor-in-chief Bari Weiss made the call, demanding an on-the-record interview with Stephen Miller or another high-ranking administration official before the piece could run. The segment had already been cleared and had been cleared by every editorial and legal review that CBS requires. Correspondent Sharon Alfonsi called it what she said in an internal email, not an editorial decision. It is a political one. She warned that letting government silence or veto stories hands the administration a kill switch for any inconvenience that they find in any reporting. Here's the context that matters. CBS's parent company, Paramount, just paid Trump personally $16 million to settle a baseless lawsuit over Kamala Harris's interview. The new owners are the Ellison family. Larry Ellison is a Trump advisor and a financial backer. They're also trying to buy CNN's parent company, and they need Trump's blessing for federal approval. The 60 Minutes executive producer has already resigned over compromised editorial independence. Trump is still threatening them on Truth Social, saying they're no better than the old ownership. Bari Weiss also objected to the story, calling detainees Venezuelan migrants. She wanted illegal immigrants instead, even though many were legally seeking asylum. This, my friends, is what corporate capture of journalism looks like in real time. And it is the single biggest reason that we pushed to release this first episode today on December 22nd. The growing capitulation and capture of the news and the truth and sane washing of the news in the United States of America has to end, even if we have to do that ourselves. Our next story, speaking of Stephen Miller has erupted at what he called blatant jury nullification. This is after a Los Angeles tow truck driver was acquitted of stealing an ICE vehicle. This, of course, is a string of examples where American citizens in the jury box are nullifying or refusing to indict cases brought by the Trump Justice Department in what are seen as crackdowns on free speech or, for example, peaceful protest. In this particular case, Bobby Nunez, 33, was charged with theft of government property in a now famous and viral video where he towed away a locked ICE vehicle. This vehicle also had firearms secured inside the vehicle, and it happened during a chaotic immigration arrest in downtown Los Angeles on October 15. This was an absolute viral moment, and the Trump administration has a history and pattern now of finding and selecting exact moments like this to make public examples out of people, but juries aren't buying it. The same, of course, is true with the now famous Subway sandwich artist. The somewhat infamous Subway sandwich artist refers to Sean Charles Dunn, who was a former Justice Department paralegal. He gained notoriety and fame in August of 2025 for throwing a Subway sandwich at a federal Border Patrol agent. I said ICE agent. I was wrong. I have to correct that for the record. In November 2025, a jury found Dunn not guilty of misdemeanor assault, rejecting the idea that his protest act constituted bodily harm. This was a case that highlights, of course, the tensions between how this government is now processing and punishing its political enemies. And of course, this week was rocked by the release of the Epstein files on Friday and what turned out more or less to be less of a release and more of a giant redaction. And everyone's talking about it, especially political officials. Senator Rand Paul, in fact, said on Sunday that he thinks it's a big mistake for the Trump administration to have released heavily redacted files on Jeffrey Epstein, and that this issue could plague them for months. Paul said in an interview on ABC's News This Week that he thinks it is a big mistake. Here's his specific quote. I mean, look, the administration has struggled for months and months with something they initially ginned up and then sort of tried to tamp down. So any evidence of any kind of indication that there's not a full reveal on this will just plague them for months and months, he continued. And of course, this is referring to the fact that entire sections of the released Epstein files have been redacted, that it appears that there has been an effort to remove or censor the president's name from these files, and that everyone who is waiting for this information is essentially left with pages and pages and pages of black text redactions. If the administration thought this would try to maybe move the topic forward, or that people would see these files, find a nothing burger, and the story would go away, it appears that the opposite, in fact, is the case. And this is causing a growing fraction within the Republican Party itself. Meanwhile, the Democratic Party is reeling from allegations and accusations about former President Bill Clinton, who appears multiple times. And perhaps what I think is my good news story of the day, Senator Bernie Sanders will swear in Zohran Mamdani as New York City's next mayor. This will happen on January 1st, 2026, and this is coming from insiders. Bernie Sanders, obviously being around for quite some time, is looking to hand off the Democratic Socialist platform, and by being so prominent swearing in Zohran Mamdani, this creates an exceptional opportunity to create an inspirational moment for the base, and of course, to begin to hand off what Bernie Sanders has built over decades and decades of public service. We expect millions of people to watch this ceremony, and it's going to be one of those moments when the left certainly feels that they've had a victory. We'll take a quick break to let you know that today's podcast of The Ignition is sponsored by our podcast, Ignite, Fighting Fascism in the Age of Its Rise. Ignite is your step-by-step toolkit on how to become a local activist and advocate for your community by fixing one thing at a time, one good act at a time. I know it's important to talk about the big national stories, but you also have to worry about the small things in your community because the small things add up. Every pothole that gets unfixed, every school board meeting that gets ignored, and every local elected official that allows corruption to flourish only allows it to grow. That's why we're asking you to ignite change in your community. This is available on all popular podcast platforms and is the sponsor of our new show, The Ignition. Now, let's get back to it. Our next story is very important, and it involves artificial intelligence. A recent study has shown that the artificial intelligence infrastructure, including data centers and power generation, now uses more water than the entire global bottled water industry combined. CO2 emissions from AI data centers and infrastructure also account for more CO2 emissions than the entire city of New York. This report also highlights a glaring omission in how these companies talk about their emissions and power usage. For example, these companies often talk about the core infrastructure, the data centers themselves, in terms of water consumption. But a report recently told us that, for example, Google, when factoring their information, did not include water consumed in generating the electricity for these data centers. And of course, the electricity is a major concern. As these data centers use up and demand more power from local infrastructures, what ultimately happens is consumers pay the price. We know this, of course, because we have data that suggests that in some areas, wholesale electricity costs as much as 267% more than it did 5 years ago in areas near data centers. And that cost is absolutely being passed on to consumers. So whether it is power generation, the usage of water, or CO2 emissions, the lack of regulation around this area is not artificial, and the expansion of these data centers certainly is not intelligent. Clinical psychologist Dr. John Gardner is raising serious questions about Trump's cognitive health based on repeated testing patterns. Trump has taken the Montreal Cognitive Assessment 3 times. This is a screening tool for dementia that takes about 10 minutes. Gardner's observation is clear. If you're giving it to him 3 times, that means you're not assessing dementia. That means you're monitoring dementia. He believes these repeat tests and MRIs, for example, Trump just had one in October, just 6 months after his April physical. Well, he thinks this suggests doctors are tracking progression, not just doing routine screenings. Here's some observable patterns. Falling asleep at public events. Rapid pressured speech that Gardner links to anxiety-driven hypomania. Swollen ankles, and then significant bruising on his hand, which the White House has attributed to handshaking and aspirin, though Trump has been seen covering it with concealer. A South LA congresswoman has suggested to the Daily Beast that Trump's drowsiness and bruising are consistent with known symptoms and side effects of Alzheimer's. The White House has characterized the October MRI as preventative and focused on his heart and abdomen. However, these assessments from psychologists and public officials are raising serious questions about the president's cognitive decline. Listen, that's it for our very first episode of The Ignition. It's a short, action-packed, and powerful bit of information. And that's the purpose of our series here, The Ignition. Daily news updates, the important news you need to know. For the first episode, it was really run and gun. We went quickly because it's important. The news today about Bari Weiss essentially censoring essential information in order to capitulate to the administration means we have to get out in front of it, even if doing that is messy, quick, and dirty. Please consider following along and sharing The Ignition. And yes, we will be asking for your support in the future. This is the news you need to know, raw, unfiltered, and uncensored. Thanks for following along here at The Ignition, and we'll see you back tomorrow for the next episode.